history, there was a group of people. They always carried a flintlock gun in the early part of the 19th century, a repeating rifle after the 1850s, and some small but practical gears working into the American frontier in the 19th century. We know that at the time, this frontier was always identified as the Wild West. So for them, in the wild, the gun was not just a hunting tool, but also a tool which could save his life in an emergency. So I believe that we may think they were an important part in the Blackpowder Time. Thus, in today's video, let's talk about the unique group of people, the mountain men. So first, we need to see the background of the mountain men before we go exploring who they are. In the early part of the 19th century, the Declaration of Independence had just been published around 30 years by the founders. The time gradually walked on the way of territorial expansion. The West was just an almost wild and unknown place. The unknown, in other point of view, it might be the opportunities. So more and more people started to decide to set their feet on this western land for a better life or just live. In my previous stories, there were several legendary people who have been mentioned, like the pioneer Daniel Boone, the explorers Lewis and Clark, etc. They had the stage of mountain man's life in a way, but more were the common people in history, and there were many people who decided to settle on the frontier finally, after many adventures in the Wild West. Many times, the mountain men are identified as the generation of explorers who followed in the footsteps of Lewis and Clark, because both legendary explorers published many findings and rockies and the Oregon country between 1806 to 1807, and the findings laid the foundation of economic growth and North American fur trade in these areas. Perhaps because of the potential of economic growth, many people decided to follow the tide of going to the west. Broadly speaking, the explorers and the settlers could be called the mountain men. Before finding the right place to build their own home, in most of their time, they lived in the wild, and this is one of the biggest characteristics of mountain men. But more accurately, the mountain men were 19th century fur trappers and pioneers centered in the American Rocky Mountains. They were active throughout the Trans-Mississippi West. In the period of territorial expansion in North America, the mountain men actually made important contributions for the expansion project of America. Because of the settlements of mountain men, these places could gradually become part of the land of the United States with the time going. And also more and more people decided to do the mountain man jobs and wanted to settle west of North America. So the road of passing to the different areas of west got more broad. Those roads were always called the westward expansion trails in the 19th century, especially between 1829 and 1890, and the trails gradually became the carriage transport network connecting the states of the eastern coast to the settlements of the west. So this also was another factor that America could expand the territory successfully. The mountain men always came from various educational, religions, and ethnic backgrounds, although many of them lived rugged lifestyles away from civilization. Some became wealthy landowners in urban America, and also there were many people who became famous as mountain men. They were not isolationists. Some participated in expeditions, scouting missions, and warfare, and those who traded fur engaged in trade. Sometimes the mountain men was so independent in many people's minds, but actually they were a highly varied group of people who retained several relationships with the larger communities. With the federal government being able to govern the remote areas in the late part of the 19th century, the West was not the same as the West in the 1820s. The opportunities like finding gold, the fur business, etc. always got less. At the same time, more and more immigrants arrived in the west of North America, especially based off the Great Plains. The West was never like before anymore. The Wild was far from the West. If you remember the story of a video game, Red Dead 2, or TV series Deadwood, I believe you can understand the feeling in that period of history. In fact, fur trade, as an important job of mountain men, began to collapse. In the 1840s, mountain men had to change to other jobs like guides and scouts. Plus the situation as said, mountain men finally went to the decline in 1880s to 1890s. The mountain man usually had a rugged life, with many not surviving more than a few years in the wilderness due to constant physical dangers, such as beating insects, wildlife, bad weather, diseases, injury, and opposition from native people. Grizzly bears were one of their greatest enemies, and winters were brutal with heavy snowstorms and low temperatures. To survive, mountain men needed keen sense and knowledge of herbal remedies and first aid, among other skills. During the summer, they could catch fish, build shelters, and hunt for food and skins. They dressed in their skin suit that had stiffened after being left outside, which provided some protection against certain enemies. In the absence of doctors in their work regions, they had to fix their own broken bones, tend to their wounds, and nurse themselves back to health. Therefore, indeed, The Revenant is an amazing film which can show a more general life of fur trappers, or of aka mountain men, in the 1820s. A man or a group of expedition teams go into a wilderness. If they do not have a weapon, it will be very dangerous, especially in that wild time. For mountain men, basically the flintlock guns was their decent weapon before the time of repeating guns were built broadly. Among those flintlocks, there were some different types. Their favorite firearms usually were the rifles, due to those rifles being in the early stage of firearms history. Most were the muzzle-loading rifles, and including pistols and early shotguns. When we deeper explore the muzzle-loading rifles, we can find a type of gun, the Hawken rifle. This type of gun is a branch of long rifles, and generally was used by them because its designer's family name was Hawken and was named the Hawken rifle. As a kind of very historical and classic American rifle, it also had many amazing stories, so we will continue to talk about this gun in the future. But now, let me go back to the mountain man story temporarily. Besides those rifles, there was a kind of type. This is the Harper stock rifle of a mountain man. The typical example is the Harper's Ferry Model 1803 rifle. The first rifles of this type were issued to Lewis and Clark for the expedition to the west. An early half-stock rifle, it was made in .54 caliber and featured a metal ramrod. One of the first military rifles in the west, it may have been used by trappers who were former soldiers. Okay, this is today's story. Hope you like this video. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. See you next time. Bye.